You are listening to the International Radio Report. Your reactions are much appreciated. Feel free to send them to radioreport@yahoo.com. That is radioreport@yahoo.com. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone, to the International Radio Report on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal. It is Sunday, September the 22nd. We thank you for joining us. My name's Sheldon. Gilles is here with me, as usual, as your co-host. We are here every Sunday with 30 minutes of news and information from the world of radio for you. Today, we're going to take you a little bit around the world. We have a couple stories on two countries we don't get to talk about very often. Some stories coming up about Gibraltar and Mongolia, so we'll have that in the second half of today's show. But we'll get things started with a story that's making a lot of news in the United States. We've been talking about this story since it began. It's been kind of dragging a little bit, but finally it looks like things are picking up. And that is the AM radio bill in the United States. The story comes from Randy J. Stine of Radioworld, and the headline is AM radio bill takes critical step in the House. The bill that would mandate AM capability in new vehicles sold in the United States took a major step forward. The House Energy and Commerce Committee voted 45-2 this week to clear the way for the AM radio in Every Vehicle Act to get a full House vote. If passed by the full House, the U.S. Secretary of Transportation would issue a new rule requiring automakers to provide access to AM broadcast stations in their motor vehicles. The two dissenting votes by committee members came from Jay Obernolt, a Republican in California, and John Curtis, a Republican in Utah. The legislation has been submitted as an amendment to the Must-Pass Defense Authorization Bill, according to a report from Axios. Auto manufacturers would have at least 2 years to comply with the rule if the bill becomes law or face a civil penalty. Manufacturers that produce fewer than 40,000 passenger cars for sale in the U.S., however, would have 4 years to meet the new requirement. A vote in the full House could come in the next few weeks, with Congress currently in session. Alternatively, a vote could be delayed until the lame duck session after November's election, according to observers. National Association of Broadcasters President and CEO Curtis Legeit applauded Wednesday's move in the House. He said NAB is grateful for the leadership of Chairs Kathy Morris Rogers and Gus Bilirakis, ranking members Frank Pallone and Jan Schakowsky, and the committee members for their recognition of AM radio's unique and vital role in protecting public safety. The AM bill has received strong bipartisan support, with 262 House representative members backing the AM radio mandate. The Senate version of the bill, S-1669, passed out of the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee in 2023, but has not come up for a full vote. U.S. Senator Edward J. Markey, a Democrat of Massachusetts, co-sponsor of the Senate bill, said he will press forward to see that his House and Senate colleagues enact the bipartisan public safety legislation. With hurricane season in full swing, it has never been more important to pass the AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act and ensure that this life-saving communication tool remains in vehicles. Consumer Technology Association CEO Gary Shapiro said today's vote by the House committee is a historic first step by Congress in mandating an ancient technology which burdens electric vehicles. More, it would stifle innovation, impose unnecessary costs on automakers, and increase prices for the consumers, he said in a statement. This proposed legislation is like mandating fax machines on the International Space Station, and Congress should spend what little session time that remains addressing real problems like the safety, ensuring lives, future deployment, and research in vehicles evolution, Self-Drive Act. So most people in favor of this, a couple people not in favor of it, and coming up with some rather strange counterpoints on it. Ancient technology of radio, AM radio, he calls it. Yeah. Interesting.
Well, the Consumer Technology Association, clearly wants to push newer technologies. That's what they want.
Yeah, well, it looks like it's going to pass. It might take a while. They're probably making it sound a little more complicated than it needs to be coming from the car manufacturer's point of view, giving them that much time to implement it.
You know, a lot of these cars use the same chip that now is coming up in some portable radios. And somebody was telling me the other day, does that mean that technically they could enable shortwave even in a car radio? And yeah, it's part of the car radio chip. It's just that it's not enabled and it's not there. They just don't want that.
It's been the same thing with cell phones. The cell phones that are circulating around the world most of them have the ability to have radio reception, to work as a radio. But a lot of them, the manufacturers are not wanting to activate them simply because they can get streaming from radio stations and use data instead of using your phone just like a radio, which isn't going to cost you anything.
Yep.
So, it would be nice to be able to have a phone that you use as a regular telephone and also have it as a regular radio.
Yep.
And it is capable in most. They don't even talk about it, apparently. I've talked to some people who've got new phones and they had no idea, and nobody's ever told them that, hey, this works as a regular radio if you activate it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a bit of that, I think, happening with this whole issue of the AM radios for the cars.
Now, Louisiana radio stations fail during Hurricane Francine. This is by Matthew Keys, thedesk.net. Several commercial radio stations in Louisiana are still off the air over a week after Hurricane Francine impacted the region. The storm made landfall as a Category 2 hurricane a week ago, Wednesday, causing power disruptions that made it difficult or impossible for some radio broadcasters to maintain their on-air operations. At least 5 radio stations were off the air as of Saturday, including KJEN 1490 AM, KCIL 96.7 FM, and KDLC 97.7 FM, according to disaster-related reports compiled by the Federal Communications Commission and reviewed by the desk on Monday. No broadcast television stations are off the air because of the storm, the FCC reported, and the majority of cell phone towers that were impacted by the hurricane have since been reactivated. Broadcast advocates typically tout the resilience of radio stations in keeping communities connected during natural disasters and other emergencies. The linkage between the local officials and the local radio stations is critical. It's the one thing that we know that will survive a lot of these disasters, former Federal Emergency Management Agency Administrator Craig Fugate said in a 2022 interview. That notion has played a starring role in touting radio's outsized importance at a time when some car manufacturers are weighing whether to abandon AM radio tuners in their vehicles in favor of more connected entertainment and information options, and has lawmakers battle against the idea by threatening to impose a mandate that would make those tuners a standard safety feature in all cars. FEMA officials in both Democratic and Republican administrations have hailed broadcast radio as the most dependable communication medium during an emergency. Senator Ed Markey wrote in a letter to several car manufacturers in December 2022. The situation with Hurricane Francine proves that radio broadcasters are no less susceptible to the impacts of severe weather as other forms of electronic communication. The thing is here, and that's not mentioned, is yes, a radio station in the middle of a Category 5 storm will probably be taken down. But they're not mentioning that if AM radio stations outside of that zone, where the storm isn't as strong, or outside the storm region, can still communicate long distances and still can be received with your car radio on AM.
Yeah, quite often the FM stations are the ones that get knocked out. They have smaller antennas, not as big structures, what have you. Some lower powered stations may be using, an antenna that's on the roof of a building or something like that. They may take a hit much quicker than a station that has a big, guy wired type of antenna farm used for mainly AM radio stations. So I think, like you said, the reach of AM, the power of AM is an important thing to have. And if people can get it in their cars, it may be the only thing they'll be able to get in their cars. So our next story is an interesting one. It's a commentary, actually, that was written in Radioworld. A gentleman named Pierre Bouvard, and it's headlined, "Let's Fix These Radio Misperceptions." Pierre Bouvard has identified 8 misconceptions that people, specifically the advertising community, have about broadcast radio in the United States. He's a Chief Insights Officer of Cumulus Media and the Westwood One Audio Active Group. He's paid to help radio put its best face forward, and he blogs often about key data points that he hopes advertisers will absorb about the medium. Ad community perceptions of media audiences are often completely opposite reality, he writes, blaming the conventional narrative that new media kills old media. We've collected frequently heard media agency and marketer myths, along with studies from Advertiser Perceptions, the gold standard of advertiser agency sentiment. Using data from research leaders at Nielsen, Maru, and Edison Research, we disprove 8 of the biggest misperception brands hold about AM/FM radio, he wrote. So here's a summary of the 8 misperceptions. The blog post includes details and charts to support his conclusions.
Misperception number 1. No one listens to AM/FM radio. Advertiser Perceptions last month asked 303 media agencies and advertisers what percentage of Americans are reached by AM/FM radio in a typical week. The response was 46%. However, Bouvard says the Nielsen reality of 82% is nearly double the perception.
Misperception number 2. Most are still working at home and commuting is still way off, impacting AM/FM radio listening. But he said Nielsen and Maru found that 85% of pre-COVID commuters are now working outside of the home, and Edison Research latest share of ear study shows AM and FM radio's share of time spent in the car has recovered to pre-pandemic norms.
Misperception number 3. Audience shares to Pandora, Spotify are larger than AM/FM radio. Advertiser Perceptions asked media agencies and marketers for the perceived audience shares of Spotify, Pandora, and AM/FM radio. The perceived audience share of Pandora, Spotify, 43%, are much greater than AM/FM radio, 27%. But the reality, Edison's share of ear reveals the audience share of AM/FM radio is 17 times larger than ad-supported Spotify and 14 times larger than ad-supported Pandora.
Misperception number 4. In the world of the connected car, the number one thing people do in their cars is stream online radio on their smartphones. Bouvard says, nope. In the car, AM/FM radio is the queen of the road with a stunning 86% share of ad-supported audio, according to Edison's share of ear.
Misperception number 5. Today's optimal media plan. Put all of your money into connected TV and digital. Bouvard provides data indicating that when a marketer takes a media plan that is based on connected TV, digital, and linear TV, and shifts just a small part of it to AM/FM radio, it can generate an impressive increase in reach for the same investment.
Misperception number 6. The optimal audio buy is Spotify, Pandora, and podcasts. But share of ear indicates that the combined ad-supported daily reach of Spotify, podcasts, and Pandora is 31%, while AM/FM radio has a daily reach of 63%.
The misperception number 7. There's a total lack of return on investment and sales lift and outcomes evidence for AM/FM radio. Bouvard cites a massive new study on marketing effectiveness showing that audio is number 2 in short-term return on investment and number 3 on long-term return on investment. And he points to separate research that, on average, AM/FM radio generates 14% lift in site traffic across 17 campaigns.
And finally, misperception number 8, AM/FM radio cannot be measured. Bouvard retorts that anything that can be measured in TV and digital can be measured in audio, and he provided a link to measurement solutions that can quantify the impact of audio campaigns. Bouvard added a bonus misperception that no one under 35 listens to AM/FM radio anymore. The reality, Nielsen reveals 18 to 34 is one of AM/FM's radio's largest listening demographics, and that more than 55 million people in that demo listen weekly.
We've said it so many times, we have these perceptions going around all the time. One we hear all the time is, oh, this is old technology. People don't do that anymore. And yet perception and reality often are very, very different. And here we see great examples that have been measured.
I think what it shows, too, this whole article is really targeted at the advertisers and what they use and how they generate revenue. Return on investment is the term they refer to several times. You want return from your advertising dollar. And it would make sense to put it where the most people are going to get exposed to it. And what these statistics are showing in so many cases is that as much as people are telling you the new technology is the way to go, the numbers prove different, that AM/FM radio is still being listened to, and the impact of those ad dollars is showing in the return on the investment. Even television, so many people, a lot of businesses are putting a lot of money into TV advertising, but a lot of people now record everything they watch so they can, fast forward through the ads and not have to pay any attention to them. So if consumers are doing that, certainly you're not going to get your return on that advertising dollar. So really does kind of prove that radio is the way still to get that return.
So what's happening with our sun? Well, our sun was very active this week. We have a sunspot that is capable of X-class flares and actually released a couple of them. Created auroras that were actually visible here in Montreal. When that happened, the geomagnetic storm level reached G4, which is extreme. And shortwave was heavily impacted and radio was impacted. Things came back to normal. We're now back into kind of normal propagation of a quiet condition. So this could be, again, the case in the coming week because sunspot AR 3825, 3828 are capable of X-class flares. We never know what could happen. Those flares would be pretty much Earth-directed, which means at this time of year, and they do say on Space Weather, one of the titles of an article is Auroras Love Equinoxes. That's because when we get to the change from summer to fall, and the same happens also in spring, there's kind of an opening in our geomagnetic field that helps storming conditions to happen. So sunspot number 109, the solar flux 161. Check it out for propagation this week. When it's good, it's really good at this time. And if for some reason something seems to happen, station seems to disappear, well, it could be a solar flare. To witness all of it, well, you got to turn on a radio and listen.
This is Glenn Hauser, on the air since 1987. You're tuned to the International Radio Report, 30 minutes of radio about radio, every Sunday morning on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal, and live streaming around the globe at ckut.ca.
We mentioned off the top of the show that we were going to talk about radio in a couple places on the planet that we don't mention very often. Maybe one of them we have in the past, but I don't think we've ever talked about Gibraltar. And this story comes as it was a submission to Glenn Hauser's World of Radio IO group from Yimber, Gavaria. Gibraltar Broadcasting Corporation launches a new and stronger radio schedules. Radio Gibraltar continues to be the radio station of choice in Gibraltar, and changes to its music policy are designed to bring listeners even more diverse and engaging listening experience. From 7 p.m., enjoy 3 hours of classic hits from across the decades, bringing both nostalgia and more variety. From Monday to Thursday evenings, Radio Gibraltar will air 70s at 7, 80s at 8, and 90s at 9. Made in Gibraltar, hosted by James Colato, moves to Friday evenings at 7 p.m. as the station starts the weekend with an hour of local music and looks ahead to live gigs happening around the Rock. The Radio Gibraltar Plus Smooth Sound is extended from only evenings to daily from 2 p.m. as part of a commitment to offer further choice during the day. The variety of ballads and best music from icons will play on 100.5 FM and 1458 medium wave or AM, with the choice also available online at gbc.gi and on the Radio Gibraltar app. There will also be a smoother sound across Sundays. Yesterday When I Was Young with Richard Cartwright stays on at 10 a.m., followed by a new Sunday show hosted by Radio Gibraltar veteran George Duboulay, with a mix of ballads and classics, offering a more relaxed listen. The Spanish language program, traditionally from 2 p.m. on weekdays, moves to 7 p.m. as a 1-hour show on the Plus service. Radio Gibraltar remains committed to its bilingual content, and it's hoped a new, carefully chosen time allows for greater accessibility and convenience for all listeners of all ages. So I went and took a listen to some of this. I have to admit I'd never listened to radio from Gibraltar before. You can go to the gbc.gi website, or if you want to download the Radio Gibraltar app and take a listen to some of these new programs. Their website will give you all the details and give you some background into the country as well and what's going on over there. So if you've never heard anything from Gibraltar, I'm curious to know what their local music sounds like. I'm not too sure. I don't think I've ever run across anybody in the world from Gibraltar, so it might be something interesting you want to check out. You could do it another way by going on to a site like Radio Garden and find Gibraltar on the map and click on any little green dot that might be there, and you could listen to maybe this station or maybe some other stations in the country of Gibraltar as well.
Well, that kind of piqued my curiosity. I'm installing the Radio Gibraltar app on my phone right now.
There you go.
So yeah, I'll be taking a listen, and it's kind of fun. You know, it's also fun to stream from these places that we've never listened to before, see with the variety what it sounds like, and also what's cool. Even when you go to pop music or rock music or anything, just the fact that you're in a different continent. Often the choice of songs, the music you'll hear is so different from what you hear at home. So it's kind of a lot of fun. It reminds me of that German station that I stream on my internet radio that has 80s music. And I hear all of these bands I've never heard before because in Europe it's so different than in North America.
Exactly. And interesting, they're doing some bilingual in Spanish as well. Just their proximity to Spain, explains the reason for doing that, I'm sure.
Next, we have Mongolia that may move to DRM. This is Michel Fremy, Radio Magazine, via Glenn Hauser's World of Radio IO Group. Will Mongolia abandon long waves in favor of short waves and digital? The problems encountered by this country in the operation of its long-wave transmitters were known. A meeting was held in September at the Central Station in the presence of the Minister of Electronic Development, Innovation and Communications. He stated that due to lack of maintenance, the propagation of radio waves has deteriorated and has dropped to 55% of the territory. People in remote areas of Mongolia can no longer listen to the radio. Realizing that the national radio is the main tool responsible for quickly transmitting information, especially on disasters, the director of the National Radio and Television Network spoke out. He stressed that the transition to world-class digital system services has been going on for more than 10 years, but has not resulted in a clear solution. Therefore, the minister in charge of the sector wants to focus on the transition of radio stations to digital technology and the expansion of shortwave radio. with the transition of the national radio to digital technology, it will cover 95% of the entire territory, and 3.5 million citizens will be able to listen to the radio regularly. It should be noted that only one of the long-wave transmitters has been replaced by a DRM-compatible transmitter. The others date back to the 1960s. Mongolia is also at risk of suffering from the lack of long-wave receivers. The digital shortwave solution is the least expensive solution to cover the territory 3 times the size of France. Now, my question is, have you thought about the fact that your population will need a DRM-capable receiver? I'm not sure this was completely thought out here.
Yeah, definitely. Especially Mongolia, very much of the country in very remote areas. They're probably holding on to some very old radios in some of those small places, I would think.
And well, will you get DRM receivers when there's pretty much no choices or anything out there? That's the other thing. Will you make them yourself? And the other thing is DRM, as we've seen, requires a very strong signal. You got to better cover that territory with a good signal because half of the time it doesn't work. So once again, I find that there's somebody somewhere pushing DRM like crazy. And for some reason, everybody's saying, oh yeah, let's get on board the shortwave digital era. Unfortunately, it doesn't work.
A couple of high-powered AM stations and maybe some regional shortwave. It's going to do the job for you.
Look, one shortwave. Just put one shortwave, and it covers the whole country.
Yeah.
So many countries had that in the past, you know.
Yeah, and people could use their old radios.
Yeah.
Just, the way they used them for decades. But no, somebody's behind the DRM movement, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So we have upcoming ham radio contests.
If you're into radio teletype, there is a big event coming up next weekend, the CQ Worldwide DX Contest, RTTY, organized by CQ Magazine. It is 0000 September 28th to 2359 Zulu September the 29th. The objective for amateurs around the world to contact as many other amateurs in as many CQ zones, countries, and W/VE QTHs as possible. 5 bands, 3.5, 7, 14, 21, and 28. And they want observance of established band plans is strongly encouraged. And, of course, it is in radio teletype only.
There's always a little more than just the standard band plan usually when this contest goes through, but it's not too bad. But it's a fun one to go through. If you like to try decoding digital modes, it's one that I like because you get all of these amateur stations from so many different countries and areas around the world. It's kind of fun to go through them. There's the main QSO party, 1200 Zulu, September 28th, 1200 Zulu, September 29th, organized by the Wireless Society of Southern Maine. Bands 160, 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meters. Modes CW and phone, which is SSB, FM, and AM. And we are out of time.
Yeah, we are. Lots of interesting stuff going on. If you have any comments, questions about any of the stories you heard on the show, or any suggestions you might have for us, you can reach us by email, radioreport@yahoo.com. You can always listen to our show live streaming and archived at ckut.ca. Our Facebook group, International Radio Report. We welcome Martin in Amsterdam joining us this week. Our YouTube channel, you can go and listen to our show anytime you like. The current shows and previous shows are there for you. We're on YouTube, the URL at IRR, and our X account at IRRCKUT. We invite you to follow us there. And we do hope you'll follow us to next Sunday morning and every Sunday morning at 10:30 Eastern here on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal for the International Radio Report. Have a great week, everybody. Talk to you again next Sunday.
Bye-bye.